So Roberta has worked with the DNR for 12 years in various capacities, from wastewater and stormwater permitting, stream biology, industrial sand sector specialist, and most recently as a non-metallic mining coordinator. And as the coordinator, she works with each of the agency's programs to address jurisdictional and policy needs at non-metallic mines. Roberta also provides DNR oversight to reclamation regulatory authorities through NR 131 performance audits, technical support, and guidance. And she's been awesome to work with. Last year, we did a webinar series, and this is the first of 3. We got another one scheduled for June 2nd and August 4th that will be continuing on in this series. I think that's about it. I'm going to end the polling and share that quick, and then we'll have Roberta get started. So here's the results. The majority are 15 of the 17 are from the County Lands Conservation Department. Yay, County Land Conservation Departments, and the Zoning Department. Cool. And other. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Roberta, you want to take over now?
Yeah, thank you, Penny. Glad everyone's able to make it today. And I'm glad that Wisconsin Land and Water is hosting this webinar series again this year. With the pandemic and everything that we still haven't worked our way through, this is an opportunity for you to get some good information and ask that burning question that you've always wanted to ask about financial assurance. In our series this year, 2 of them are going to be dedicated to financial assurance. Part 1 today is going to be focusing in on the common areas of administration for financial assurance. So in getting started, I will walk everyone through kind of the general administrative processes to talk about the filing, the types, management, and other things. A little bit on maintenance of financial assurance, kind of what's the responsibility of the operator, what's the responsibility of the regulatory authority, and then wrap us up with discussion on bankruptcy. Last year was very active on the bankruptcy front. For DNR and for our regulatory authorities. And so I'll just sort of walk you through kind of the general what happens when a bankruptcy occurs and what you can expect from that. Next time, I believe we're going to be focusing in on the actual calculation of financial assurance, among other administrative processes and challenges that can come up. So in getting started, I would like to just kind of mention that I'm going to be walking you through the auspices of NR 135 as it is laid out in the code. So it's not necessarily going to match up with the order of your ordinance. And every section that I refer to in NR 135 will have a reference back to your ordinance. So you should be able to cross-reference it at some point for your authorities. So for our purposes in the training today, I'll be referring to NR 135, which is the gold standard. Okay, so under filing, so this is where it is discussed that financial assurance needs to be filed with the regulatory authority, and that the operator does this with them. The filing also has to indicate that the operator will provide that faithful performance with all of the requirements. It's one of those required signatories under the application and under the reclamation permit. This is one other location where faithful performance is signed onto, or is becoming now a more of a contractual agreement by the operator. That financial assurance needs to be paid exclusively to the regulatory authority, which can be problematic when we look at some of the types of forms out there besides surety bonds or letters of credit. So I'll go into detail over that in a few extra slides down the road. One thing to note is that if the non-metallic mine site is contained within 2 different jurisdictions, for authorities, say it's resting between 2 county areas, or it's in a county that also has a local municipality that is an RA, the one that has the primary jurisdiction will be the one that will hold the bond, so that there will not be two separate bonds to be held for one site. A note for you at this point, there is an exemption from financial assurance, and that is all of the public entities. So county highway pits, town pits, even DNR and other state, like if DOT owns and operates a permit, any state agency will also be exempt from financial assurance on the mine site. But that's not to say that they shouldn't have, and they do, are required to have their reclamation permit. They are required to pay annual fees, and they are to have a reclamation plan in place. The only thing that they're exempt from is the financial assurance. The reason for that, county to county entities would not necessarily need to provide financial assurance for its own entity. And the town and the state would follow different processes for compliance measures at the site. And typically we would not expect a government agency to file bankruptcy. We don't expect it. However, we don't expect that a county or a municipality would cease to exist because of a bankruptcy. So financial assurance is not required by public entities, but all private entities are. All right, now to jump into amount and duration, I'm going to talk a little bit about how much we are expected to have in a financial assurance document. I know that it varies around the state, and NR 135 really directs folks to establish an amount that is equal to the cost of the regulatory authority to reclaim that site to that approved plan. So we do know that there are creative ways around the state to be able to determine that amount. And I wanted to kind of walk through a little bit how you would do this on a site-by-site basis. But while I'm doing that, Penny, maybe you can call up our next poll question for folks. And to be sure, Penny is the only one that has access to the who answers what. I only just see what's on the screen, which is the same thing you do. So I'm asking you now if you could share with us how you determine your amount to be secured under financial assurance arrangements. Do you do it on a per acre amount, a site-by-site basis, or do you have another way that you determine it? So if you could, please take a minute, and while I'm talking, cast your vote.
And I just want to mention too, excuse me, Roberta, those are anonymous. I put them anonymous, so we don't know who says what. So excellent. I put all of the polls that way. So okay. Feel free to answer them, and you're not going to get Roberta calling you about something afterwards. So
no, that's not what that's not what this is for. This is just a sharing.
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. So while I'm talking about that cost, so here's an example from a reclamation plan that the department had reviewed on the behalf of a regulatory authority. If you recall from last year's discussion on reclamation plans, the operator is supposed to provide that estimated cost to reclaim the site. And it's helpful if the operator could provide you with a breakdown listing of the types of equipment, what is involved with the use of that equipment, like in rough grading, finish grading, topsoil distribution, soil prep, supply materials, things like that. If they could at least provide you a good detailed listing of all what is required out of that plan to do, and give you that estimated cost at the time the plan was prepared, and the area that it would apply to, that's a good jumping off point for you right there. I think a large amount of the legwork in making a site determination is first figuring out the activities that are required and the degree by which those activities need to be done. Once that's in place, then estimating or reevaluating that cost becomes a cross-reference with known values at that time that the permit is established. And then down the road, as you're doing maintenance, it's an easy to reevaluate basis. So hopefully you are getting reclamation plans that have good details to them on that reclamation cost. If not, there's an opportunity for you to work with your operator to beef that listing up. So then as we're going through and talking about this cost for reclamation, if an operator has more than one site in a county's jurisdiction or a local municipality, the amount of financial assurance can consider the cost for all of those permitted sites in that jurisdiction. One bond can be held for all sites or each individual site, and that is at the RA's discretion. A lesser amount can be accepted if the operator is struggling to come up with the full amount. And again, you have to evaluate the degree by which a lesser amount would be allowed, and whether or not the operator has the capacity to be able to bring that amount up over time to the amount that's needed. An escrow account can be used to help grow that dollar amount needed, and the payments into that escrow account can be based off of their gross sales to help set up that amount needed over the period expected. And I would imagine you would want to have that evaluated pretty frequently to make sure that it's in keeping with the amount of unreclaimed acres. And then the financial assurance period is dictated by the time needed to establish that post-mining land use as approved in the reclamation plan, which could extend beyond the permit duration if that maintenance period extends beyond any permitting activity. All right, Penny, how do we do with our poll?
Okay, let's end it and see what we have. There you go.
There we go. Hey, pretty close. And we have a couple of folks that said they do things a little bit differently, and that is very cool. At some point or another, when we can expand our poll to include typed responses, I'd be curious to learn what other methods are out there for determining the amount of financial assurance. So thank you.
Roberta, you also have a question in the chat. If you want to take over that right now, I can read it to you if you
Please
can't
do.
see it.
Please do.
In this scenario, one bond for multiple sites, how does the RA pull financial assurance on a single site?
That's a really great question. And chances are the reason for pulling financial assurance is going to be tied to the ability of that operator to reclaim not just that site, but probably all of the sites. So if you're considering having to pull bond for one site, chances are you may have to pull it for all of the sites, which would be the main reason for combining all of the sites under one bond. If that is not an issue, say there's a landowner disagreement and the operator is not cooperating with that, then what you would do is you would talk to the bond provider, the surety company, and provide them with the dollar amount you need for that one particular site and claim just that. And it is something that you work out with that surety holder. And I hope that answers your question. So let's talk a little bit about our forms. So we have the primary identified financial assurance in the language in NR 135 is by bond, but they do also include the wording or alternate form. And then they provide you a listing, examples, cash, which is always accepted, is a form of financial assurance that can be provided. Certificates of deposit, government securities, those between the cash and those government securities, there's usually an interest and a maturity rate that you'd have to work with. And any of those types of things would have to be addressed because you will be holding that that form instead of the operator or the bank. And there's been some kind of interesting circumstances with cash accounts that account really needs to be in the control of the RA and not the operator. Irrevocable letters of credit and irrevocable trusts and escrow accounts all generate some type of interest-bearing account as well. Letters of credit usually go back to the bank. Irrevocable trusts will be held also at the bank, but escrow accounts will be another one of those that the RA will control. And then last but certainly not least in the world of financial assurance is the ability for an operator to utilize net worth. You know, it was part of the statute, so the code has to include it. And unless there's a change in the statute, an operator can entertain that. I will have several slides, or I will have a very busy slide down the road to talk a little bit about the net worth test that would have to be met. All right. Let's see. Penny, I had another poll, which I believe was on types of financial assurance. So if you want to call that up while I pull in my next slide here. So while I'm talking a little bit about the maintenance, I'd like to hear from you guys on what seems to be the most common form of financial assurance. So kind of let me know what you got going on, and we'll check it out in a little bit. Thank you. All right, so as I mentioned, the form of financial assurance is to be paid exclusively to the regulatory authority. The regulatory authority is the only one allowed to inform the provider or the release of that financial assurance once the certificate of completion has been issued. The operator can request or inform the regulatory authority that they are done mining, but the release of the financial assurance is determined by the RA. So we'll have some examples for you on what that might look like down the road as we go. As mentioned before, some of these interest-bearing accounts can accrue for some forms that the RA is in control of. The RA needs to take that interest that comes on those accounts and pay that back to the operator. The RA is not allowed to hold that interest, just the base amount needed. CDs, as those and other government sureties, securities are, they have a maturation date, and each of those needs to be automatically renewed, or it needs to be replaced before it becomes mature. So if you do accept a CD, ensure that there is a provision for it to be automatically renewed. Some of the financial assurance arrangements can consider a blend of forms. So if an operator has some cash on hand, but not enough and needs to go get a letter of credit, or they don't have full credit, and so now they want to utilize the credit that they do have available, along with maybe some other forms of financial assurance. They can combine those to create the total amount needed. So if you do have an operator that's struggling to come up with the full amount, you are able to ask them if they've explored all of their options to come up with the full amount. Liens on property is a bit of a gray area. I would say it's kind of one of those little add-ins in the code, and it's not entirely sure the entirety of its purpose. We are looking at the fact that the use of a mortgage or some other type of escrow-based form would be accompanied with some type of a lien on a property, how that gives the county its authority to be able to seize that property if they should have to pull that financial assurance for the full amount. It's unclear. And I will at least share with you that the Department of Natural Resources, when engaged with financial assurance for waste and materials management and long-term monitoring of sites and things like that, the department generally doesn't deal with liens because of its unstable basis that you may or may not have the full value on that property for the length of time that you need it to have. So it's a real gray area, and those are things that we would take on a case-by-case basis if needed. You'd have to be comfortable with the operator to accept that. And then at this point, you may want to consider generating a contract for every form that you do accept. And the reason being is that not always do the certificates that are provided or the policies that are generated for financial assurance contains the proper language that is needed. And not only do you need the operator to agree to the terms of the financial assurance, but you also need that surety to have a commitment to that form of financial assurance. So I'm going to give you some examples on how we go about that, how DNR goes about that. As I mentioned before, our waste and materials management program is engaged with responsible parties for contaminated soil sites, for landfills, and other solid waste facilities that are required to provide a form of financial responsibility. And that link on the left there will take you to DNR's waste management program, where you can find all the examples of these contractual agreements that the department generated and provides to both the operator and the financial assurance provider. I'm going to direct your attention to the bottom of the list, storage and processing facilities. The closure performance bond is not too unlike what maybe something could be utilized for reclamation. So as you can see, it's a legal form. It provides the authority for which the bond is required. It identifies the people involved, the address of the facility, the dollar amount that is agreed upon, and the name of the financial assurance provider. Along with other provisions, the kind of second page of it all will talk about the effective date of the bond, and will provide that all important language of that 90-day prior to cancellation notification. I believe that this is probably the biggest reason for having this contract in place, in addition to the identifying parties. This also calls in the commitment needed by the operator to provide replacement financial assurance if a financial assurance provider needs to cancel, and kind of the consequences for which the RA would then be in the position to do should either of those stipulations are not met. And then, of course, everybody signs it. The operator signs it, the provider assigns it, an attorney for the provider can also sign and then provide that bond number. And that is a document that if you have to pull that bond, is something that is legally binding, and that the kind of is that be all end all document that the surety company or other provider needs to have as evidence that you can lay claim to that bond.
Would you want me to show the poll?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's see how people voted.
Let's see what we got. There you go.
I don't see it.
Oh, I have to share it. Sorry, I
There we
stopped
go.
it. There.
All right. Wow. Okay. So we do have quite a lot of financial assurances that are tied up in bonds and letters of credit, a smattering of cash and CDs, and some others out there as well. All right. Thank you for sharing. I kind of suspected that we had a pretty heavy balance between those first two, and so far you guys are confirming that suspicion by me. All right. So moving along, an operator can change the method of their financial assurance. They can go from one type to another, or they can move to other types as well. That mean, that kind of combination of types, but they can't do it any more frequently than once a year. The only exception to that is if they make that change in their form or their method, and the RA later on evaluates the amount needed and needs to have that adjusted, then that is another opportunity in which they can change forms to be able to make that change. So the operator does need to notify the RA before they make that change. They need at least a 60-day notification. And the regulatory authority needs to let the operator know in writing that they approve of that change. So it's a two-step process there. All right. Now to talk a little bit about net worth. Do we have any questions that I need to go through before I bring up this big topic? No questions yet?
There's a few questions, but you want
We'll
to
save
take them
them.
all, save them to the end like you had talked, or would you want to take what we have? There's been a few.
Okay,
Tracy,
let me take a few, and then I'll jump into the net worth test, and then hopefully that can feed other questions towards the end.
Okay, I'll do a few, and I was multitasking because we've had a few late registrations, so I was sending out registrations the question before. So this one is from Megan and Adams, and she was wondering what would be the reasoning for switching the FA type?
Good question. So we have seen, or I have seen in talking with our waste program folks, where a surety bond company is no longer registered to do business in the state of Wisconsin, and the operator is now switching to a letter of credit with a company who will provide the financial assurance but does not do surety bonding. That might be one example. Another example is when an escrow account would become to the value needed, and now they want to roll both cash and escrow into another form like a CD. They want to simplify the number of methods that they have for financial assurance. So that might be another reason why they would change methods.
Okay, I'll keep going until you tell me to stop. Do the terms of the bond covering multiple sites need to specify that a lesser dollar amount may be drawn for a single site?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure how that would be handled. I think that would be a situation that would be a case-by-case basis. So if you got something like that going on, that might be something that we would want to talk with court counsel and or our program attorneys to help work through some of those logistics. It seems like one of those rarer type situations, but not entirely sure how that would be played out.
Okay, and Adams County mentioned that they, county does not have a fee for inspections. The only fees that they have are for the annual fee and for plan reviews. So that was just a
based off a
comment.
question, Penny, that was based off a question from Lincoln County.
Oh,
and
okay.
Their
Thanks,
question
Tracy.
was more of a county by county question, but is it common to have a site inspection fee from the RA for reclamation inspection?
So that kind of falls a little bit more under other areas of administration. So the financial assurance is something that they have to post before they can begin mining, and the annual fees can include the cost for doing inspections. And so your vehicle mileage, your time and equipment usage for conducting inspections would all be wrapped in with that annual fee basis typically. And so NR 135 doesn't really identify inspection fees as a separate fee, but it can be included with the annual fee. I guess that's about the best I can really answer that question by. So I know that there's a lot of different administrative costs that are generated for that.
Thank you, Tracy. And did this one, in this scenario, one bond for the multiple sites, how does an RA pull an FA on a single site? Did that one get done before?
Yeah, Tracy, I think you
Yep.
popped that
Yep,
one.
Okay, that's
I
one
think
she
all the
asked, right?
questions in the chat are answered now.
Okay,
Excellent.
thank you.
Great. Now we can go and talk a little bit about net worth test. Okay, so not a very common method, but it has been used around the state. And it is a big deal, not only on the regulatory authorities' part, but on the operator's part, to demonstrate that they have the net worth in their corporation to be able to use that as a form of financial assurance. So NR 135/4013 kind of lays it all out for you. And it really goes back to our solid waste statute and points to the very specific processes in there. So rather than have you going back and forth between two different statutes and codes to figure it all out, I'm giving you kind of a real broad summary over what the operator would have to do in order to meet the net worth test. So first off, it has to be a company. Some of you may have operators that push their landowners to provide that financial assurance. And that's really discouraged because it is the operator who's ultimately responsible for doing reclamation, and they should be the one who is holding that financial responsibility. Therefore, if net worth is going to be an option at all, it needs to be a company defined in the statute, a for-profit business required to comply with statutes and codes and permits. So the operator then needs to submit required information for net worth tests. They apply to the RA for that, and they provide all of the documentation that is to be utilized by a third-party certified public accountant. So a corporate financial officer cannot do this. This has to be done by a third party. The company must provide information to be able to have that CPA evaluate their assets ratios, their liabilities ratios, and then their assets to liabilities ratios. So there's a whole lot of ratio calculations that have to be met. There's actual values in the statute that they can't be below. Then they also have to demonstrate that they have creditworthiness, and a whole host of other qualifiers that, when everything is calculated together, results in a net worth of that company that is at least 6 times the required amount of financial assurance that's needed for the site. So those are some pretty hefty requirements that they have to meet. And the third-party CPA is going to provide the regulatory authority that report that has all of those calculated values in there. So then once the RA receives that report, then they have to make a determination. Are they going to accept that net worth test or deny it? They have to provide the reasons for acceptance or denial, which comes with the potential for a public hearing. If that net worth test is accepted, then the net worth form of financial assurance is sealed by a legally binding contract that gives the regulatory authority the right to that value. That's not to say that once you accept that you can just sort of tuck that in the drawer with the rest of your financial assurance documents. You have to pull this one out every year and go through that same third-party CPA process to determine that their net worth is still meeting that test. It can also be done at any time that the regulatory authority believes that that net worth is insufficient. Obviously, there's going to be some heavy-duty fees associated with evaluating that net worth and meeting that net worth test, and that'll be generated by the third-party CPA and should be paid by the operator. They're the ones pursuing the net worth test. So the county does not have to be the CPA knowledgeable entity, but you do have to have some understanding of some of these assets and liabilities ratios, and to be able to read that CPA report to determine whether or not that company is going to meet that net worth test. So any legal review and or legally binding contracts that would be generated would have to be factored in that cost and part of those fees as well. So net worth is not a very popular method, certainly not by the RA or by many operators that I've ever talked to, but it is a form that can be utilized, and it has been done at least in a handful number of times. All right. Let's talk a little bit about financial assurance review and adjustment and waivers. So net worth test aside, every other form of financial assurance that is accepted does have to go through a periodic review by the RA, and it has to ensure that it still is equaling the outstanding costs to reclaim the site. If the RA finds that that value is either too high or too low, I don't know that anybody has really ever come up with a value that is too high. Certainly I've seen examples of the financial assurance being too low. The RA then would provide the requirement to adjust that financial assurance to the operator in writing and those reasons for that adjustment. Some of those reasons can be very simply based. So if you have a site-by-site evaluation and have, from the beginning of the permit process, a site-specific evaluation, adjusting can be based off of prevailing or projected inflation. That could be a kind of a fail-safe way to ensure that you have the correct amount, knowing that there will be fluctuations in current costs depending on what's going on with the economy and the market at the time, but inflation over time generally follows a general track and will even itself out in subsequent years. So that is one way that financial assurance can be adjusted. If, on the other hand, the site is expanding rapidly or is failing to meet contemporaneous reclamation needs, so like there hasn't been any reclamation activity going on, or perhaps maybe the site is changing conditions that is adding a cost or adding a facet to reclamation not previously identified. So then the adjustment reasons can be based on latest cost estimates. Additionally, an operator can request for an interim reclamation waiver, which will allow for financial assurance to be reduced or waived in areas that have been reclaimed on an intermittent basis. And they have to meet the standards for that. That's in the code that we identified, I believe, last year in our overview. That financial assurance, if it is reduced or waived for those areas, the RA needs to have reasonable assurance that the remaining amount of financial assurance for the rest of the site will cover the cost of reclamation. An example of an interim reclaimed area would be topsoil berms that are vegetated and stable. It's going to be disturbed ultimately prior to final reclamation, because that topsoil would then have to be redistributed around the site. But in the meantime, there's nothing going on there. And so they could ask for a reduction in financial assurance for that purpose. If the RA feels reasonably certain that the reclamation cost that is held on the remainder of the site will cover what needs to be restabilized in final reclamation, then that can be granted. All right, so a little bit on forfeiture. So financial assurance can be forfeited under two conditions. One is when the permit is revoked, and the other is when the operator ceases to mine and fails to reclaim the site according to the plan. So what are the things that lead up to these things? So pretty straightforward. Permit is revoked. You have to meet the grounds for revoking a permit. And those can include not having a reclamation plan on the site, or that they're failing to maintain that financial assurance. It hasn't been canceled yet, but you've received that cancellation notice. Therefore, that could be grounds for revoking a permit. They're also we're also looking at failure to follow the approved plan. So if you have an approved plan and they're continuously going outside the permitted boundary, or they are not making the appropriate measures for reclamation, and the site is extremely unstable, and you feel the need to be able to revoke that permit and reclaim that site and get it stabilized, that is one particular reason that could be used for revoking that permit. Suspension can be utilized up to a 30-day period to kind of be that lead-in prior to revocation of a permit and prior to the forfeiture of the financial assurance. That's provision that is allowed as a kind of a wake-up call to the operator to say, hey, you've got some conditions here that we need to address. We're going to suspend your mining activity first, but if we don't have it, then we're going to potentially move to revocation. And the consequences for that is that you lose your financial assurance. Then once that financial assurance is forfeited, then the regulatory authority can use that to reclaim the site. All right, so that's the pretty straightforward mechanism of forfeiture. And the other mechanism for forfeiture of financial assurance is not so straightforward. The operator ceased to mine and fails to reclaim the site. Well, I think every one of the regulatory authorities around the state could point to one or two sites or more in their jurisdiction in which no mining has taken place for quite a few years in a row. And that, well, they have financial assurance on it. They pay their annual fee, but that site is looking pretty abandoned. So what we might want you to do is kind of get a hold of that operator and have some real pointed conversations with them. Do some due diligence. If that site's been sitting dormant for a long time, do you really still have that financial assurance in place, or did it get canceled without you being notified? Look into that. And then maybe with that operator, do a little bit of truth testing. Go back and look at that reclamation plan. Is there a stipulation in that plan that says that they were going to be completed mining at a period of time? In which case, has that time passed, and do you need to push that operator to reclaim that site? And if they don't or aren't available, that could be a reason for forfeiture. If, on the other hand, they're giving you that story about, well, we've got, this marketable material, we just don't have a project, that could be an opportunity to evaluate that site from the perspective of, what's it like? Is it truly dormant, or are we looking at it being mainly abandoned and they just don't want to put the work into reclaiming that site? They've got that plan in place. Are they following it? Are they willing to follow it? Kind of evaluate those things before you utilize this option as for forfeiting that financial assurance and getting the site reclaimed. All right, Penny, I'm going to jump in and talk about cancellation. Can you give us our last poll for everybody? There we go. I'm looking to see how many of you have experienced cancellation of financial assurance. So while you're filling in that poll, I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. So as mentioned before, when I was providing you the forms, the provider of that financial assurance needs to notify the regulatory authority at least 90 days prior to cancellation. They need to provide that notification through registered or certified mail. And the operator has first 60 days of that 90-day period to come up with a replacement financial assurance for that site. If they fail to provide that in that time frame, then all mining must cease. So that's the cue to the RA to utilize either suspension or revocation in addressing that. If you don't have revocation in place, it will be very difficult for you to be able to claim that financial assurance. Reasons for cancellation can vary. They can lead to permit revocation and forfeiture, as mentioned. So I would definitely, if you get a cancellation notice received, your first duty now is to reach out to that operator and say, what's going on here? And can you get me replacement financial assurance? There's usually a lot of stuff that happens in the interim with regards to when you get notified and when that operator doesn't provide that financial assurance. As an RA, you will need to be able to get out there and look at the site, see what condition it's in, do your notification legwork to the RA to say, hey, we've got a non-complying situation here because financial assurance isn't being maintained. You're running the risk. You have to send out notifications to the operator to kind of document why you're reaching out to that surety when you do claim it, saying, here's all of our efforts to date to try and rectify this situation. So do that due diligence. And I am aware of sites cancellation that has occurred all around the state for various means, but Penny, do we have a finish on the poll yet? Or are people still voting? There it is. Okay, so we've had a good chunk of folks that have really said, yep, we have, and a good percentage of you that are are confident you have not had cancellation, which is awesome. You must be very engaged with your operators to be able to head those things off of the pass. And those of you that don't know, here's an opportunity for you to dig in and find out. Thank you. All right, how are we doing? I think, yep, 10 minutes worth to talk about bankruptcy. You know, last year was really rough on the industrial sand mining industry, but it was also rough on our regular operators. The pandemic really slowed down the need for mineral aggregate, slowed down the need for sand, sent people home for periods of time, and quite a few operators struggled to make ends meet. So what's supposed to happen under a bankruptcy? Well, the operator is supposed to notify the regulatory authority by certified mail that they are bankrupt. They have to notify the RA both of their voluntary and involuntary proceedings. And that depends on what form of bankruptcy is being filed. That notification has to be done within 10 days of the commencement of proceedings. So as soon as it's filed with the courts, they've got 10 days to be able to notify the RA. We do realize that that very seldom happens. People go bankrupt, they're just ready to walk away from everything and anybody. And so as a result, DNR doesn't wait around to be notified. We sign up with services to send us notifications each week. Now, when you sign up for that, you're getting notifications of every bankruptcy that's ever filed. So you get personal notifications as well as corporate notifications, and they come at you every week. So if you want to be in the know, just be forewarned that you're going to get a lot of information. DNR receives everything. We sift through it. We don't always catch everything, but we catch most of them. So over the years, we have recent bankruptcies and we've had some historic bankruptcies. I am kind of throwing the Amon brothers from 2013 as our historic bankruptcy category. We had a couple of counties involved with that, Jefferson and Walworth counties. It involved multiple sites and sites where we had a single bond for multiple sites, not across counties, but within a county. And then there was the restriction for mining for 10 years. And I will go into more detail over the consequences of a bankruptcy filing with regards to that in a little bit. Recently, industrial sand, I know Wood County has experienced it, Chippewa County and Barron County has all experienced it. We have also had a non-industrial sand mine company go bankrupt in Fond du Lac County. So there's folks out there that can share their experiences, and I can always get anybody in touch if you're going through an experience with bankruptcy of an operator. So let's talk a little bit about the types of bankruptcies. So Chapter 11 is a corporate reorganization. So that's more like that voluntary proceeding that was mentioned before. It's potential that a reorganization could end in the continuation of the company and mining can still continue. Or it can go to an involuntary proceeding, such as a Chapter 7 that leads to liquidation or dissolution of the company. Another form that's out there is a Chapter 128. Both Chapter 11 and 7 are federal proceedings. A Chapter 128 is a state of Wisconsin proceeding, which is very similar to a Chapter 7. DNR can get involved in a bankruptcy in a couple of different ways. The U.S. Department of Justice and EPA will reach out on any federal involuntary proceedings, and even some voluntary proceedings if they feel as though there's a significant environmental impact. They'll reach out to DNR as the primary delegated authority under the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And so we may be directly involved with bankruptcy filings as an adjunct proceeding because of our direct permitting through stormwater, wastewater, and other programs. But we also may get involved as a supporting agency to our regulatory authorities. As you're going through and looking for interpretations of the code and how to handle your specific situation, the RA can call in the department for technical assistance. Typically with a bankruptcy filing, regardless of what form it is, DNR looks to find a comfort clause in the Chapter 11 filing that requires their commitment to their environmental requirements in spite of the distribution of their assets and a reorganization of their corporate structure. That, if they're making that commitment to their environmental requirements, that is still enforceable under law. So it can play out a couple of different ways. As mentioned before, Chapter 11 can lead to 7. We can be called in. DNR can provide that mediation, not only for the RA, but also for the mining company. But it could be that a Chapter 7 leading to, Chapter 11 leading to 7 would lead to that revoking of permits, seizure of that financial assurance, and then commencement of reclaiming the site by the regulatory authority. Best case scenario, obviously Chapter 11 resolves and the operator is successfully reorganized and continues operations or chooses to reclaim the site. Worst case scenario, now we have that company dissolving and the RA is left with full responsibility to reclaim that site, including any additional permits that might be required of the department to do so. That was one that was a learning experience recently as well. The other worst case scenario is when that financial assurance ultimately is not sufficient to reclaim to what the plan is and modifications need to be done. I would love to give you all the details on the Amon Brothers site. As mentioned, it had, all sites in Walworth County were under one bond. It was valid, but it wasn't sufficient. The county worked with DNR in modifying reclamation plans. I think the receiver that was involved in this was pretty savvy as well. He was able to find new operators to take over the permitting of some of the sites. And for other sites, they were able to be reclaimed with the amount that was obtained. And then finally, just a quick note to be able to let you know that we do see that bonds have been canceled, not as a result of bankruptcy, but because they've just failed to maintain it. Those can also lead to a similar situation in which now we're seeing these sites be reclaimed by the RA. It's also possible that those ones go through the sale operations so that they can avoid going through liquidation through the Chapter 7 process. Consequences for bankruptcy, as mentioned, that follows the operator for 10 years. And it can be the basis for denying a permit. It's not corporate based, it follows the individual, because if a bankruptcy results in a liquidation, then that corporate entity doesn't exist, but that individual can go and open a new corporation. So how are you going to know, right? We don't really track these over the state. One thing that you may want to consider is if you have an application that you are looking to approve and the operator is having trouble getting financial assurance or any credit whatsoever, you might want to take a little closer look at that operator and see if he has indeed suffered a bankruptcy as a result of mining. And that can be a tip off for you there. But other than that, I think at this point now, here's my contact information. And Penny, we are right at 11 o'clock. Do you think we could take a few extra minutes to see what other questions might be out there?
Sure, let's answer them. And I just wanted to mention too, I sent out in the chat a link for an evaluation. If you could fill that out, that would be great. And this is being recorded, so I will send out the link for the YouTube when it is available. We have actually Wisconsin Land and Water has a new intern that's been helping us with some of these things. So hopefully we get that in the near future, and I will share that with you. So Marathon County asked, if net worth is used as FA on a site, how does the RA draw pull FA if necessary? Let's say operator files bankruptcy. Does the RA just get in to line with the other creditors? My thing's cut off there. Hoping funds will be there. Did you get that? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I kind of follow the question there.
Okay.
Is how do you collect on net worth? Basically, is the main takeaway that I got out of the question. And again, there's a lot of unknowns with these types of things, but the key is going to be in that contractual agreement that is signed by the operator with the RA on that net worth. If that has to be claimed, now you're going to be getting all kinds of attorneys involved. There's delving into corporate assets that would have to be obtained, and you're going to need to have that contract on hand, and you're going to need the documentation over why you need to claim that financial assurance. So yeah, at that point, I would have to say that that would be a very site specific situation that would require good attorney involvement. Okay,
one more. Or there are a few more, but this is the next one. Is there a cited resource to use for adjusting FA using inflation?
Yes, there's a federal inflation chart. I did not have the link available to me for preparing this presentation, but anybody who wants that, I can send the link along for you to reference. But yeah, there's a federal inflation
if you could send
chart.
that to me, then I'll send it out with the recording.
Okay.
How's that sound? Okay, so people watch for that in your emails. And another one is, how is reclamation and FA handled in the event that an operator permit holder passes away unexpectedly? Estate has no assigned heirs and is likely to end up in probate.
I guess it would have to, we'd have to look at the form of financial assurance. If it's like an irrevocable trust, that would be a claim against the estate. And that would be part of that kind of that contractual agreement that you would have under that irrevocable trust. The same would go for any types of escrow accounts or anything that would end up going through the estate. The surety bond, you would still be able to claim that if it is still valid and hasn't been canceled. Letters of credit, I believe, would be the same way. So have a look at your form of financial assurance and, you know, take a look at whether or not you'd have to go through the estate in order to claim it.
Okay.
And that's if you needed to. If there's an opportunity to sell the site and a new operator take over, or the landowners secure or do reclaim, you know, there's many different options, but just looking at it from the perspective of claiming with financial assurance.
Great. Would you mind sharing your PowerPoint with me as well? And then I can send that out. Okay. Yeah, send it to me maybe as a PDF, and then I can share that with everyone. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Does anyone have anything quick that they want to ask? I'll let you, so you can unmute yourself and ask it that way. We'll get them done quicker. Well, I think we answered them all. Awesome job again, Roberta. And just a reminder, the next webinar will be on Wednesday, June 2nd at 10 o'clock, and that'll be part 2 for financial assurance. And then on Wednesday, August 4th at 10 o'clock, we'll have on permit determination. Okay, so thanks again for joining us, and we'll send out the link when it is available. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Thanks,
Thank you.
Roberta.
Thank you, Penny.